how do we really know what we think we know about society? How do we get past our gut feelings and common sense to understand the hidden rules that are running the world around us? It's a huge question, but it turns out sociologists have a whole toolkit designed to answer it. Well, let's get into it.
You know, it's funny. Sometimes the biggest discoveries about our world are found in the places we're trained to ignore. The spaces we just walk past every single day, like a public park. These places can hold some pretty surprising secrets about who we are and, more importantly, what we do when we think no one's looking.
And that's where our story really begins, with a fascinating and, a deeply controversial story. It's about a researcher who wanted to shine a light on a hidden corner of society, but the way he did it, well, it raised some incredibly serious questions that literally changed the field forever.
So, let's dive right into this secret study. It became one of the most famous and infamous in the entire history of sociology. Okay, so the setting. It's the 1970s, and sociologist Loud Humphreys is studying what were known then as tier rooms. These were public restrooms where men would meet up for anonymous sexual encounters. This was a world that was almost completely invisible to the mainstream, and it was highly stigmatized. And Humphreys, he wanted to understand it from the inside.
And what he found was, honestly, pretty mind-blowing. First off, these weren't just random, chaotic meetings. He discovered they were super structured, with all these unspoken rules and roles that everyone just knew. And maybe the biggest shocker of all? Many of the men were married, had kids, and were seen in their communities as totally normal. His work just completely shattered the stereotypes of the time.
But here's the thing. The findings were absolutely groundbreaking, but they came at a serious, serious cost. And that brings us to the real heart of this story, the ethical dilemma.
And this really gets to the core of the problem, right? On one hand, you have this noble goal, let's replace prejudice with actual hard knowledge. But on the other hand, the methods he used to get there, we're talking about serious deception, zero consent, and a massive invasion of privacy.
So let's break down exactly how he pulled this off, because it gets wilder with each step. He didn't just watch from afar, he actually pretended to be a watch queen, a lookout, so he could observe everything up close. Then, he'd secretly jot down the license plate numbers of the men's cars. He even used a contact to get their home addresses. And get this, a year later, he showed up at their houses wearing a disguise, pretending to be conducting a totally unrelated survey, just to get more information on their personal lives.
And you have to remember the context here, which makes this so dangerous. The activity he was observing was illegal back then. If his notes had ever gotten into the hands of the police, these men could have lost everything. Their jobs, their families, they could have even gone to prison. The risk he put them in was just enormous.
Now, you might be wondering, could a study like this happen today? The short answer is absolutely not. No way. Because of studies just like this one, the rules have completely changed. Today, researchers have to get what's called informed consent. That means you have to know you're being studied and agree to it. And they have to guarantee your confidentiality. A study using Humphreys' methods wouldn't even get past the front door of a university ethics board today.
Okay, so if that's the big what not to do example, what do sociologists actually do? Well, this whole controversy forced the field to build a much more ethical and rigorous toolkit. So let's take a look at the powerful tools they've got now. The basic method Humphreys was trying to use, at its core, is called ethnography. And it's an incredible tool where a researcher literally immerses themselves in a community to see the world from their perspective. When it's done right, with transparency and trust, it can reveal these rich, complicated details about social life that you just can't get any other way.
But, okay, what if you don't just want to watch the world as it is? What if you want to isolate one specific thing and see what happens? Well, for that, you need a totally different tool, the experiment. And a really famous, and also pretty controversial example, is the Stanford prison experiment.
I'm sure many of you have heard of this one. Researchers took regular college students and randomly made them either prisoners or guards. The experiment had to be shut down in less than a week because the guards became genuinely cruel and authoritarian. The shocking takeaway was that it wasn't about them being bad people. It was the situation, the power dynamic itself, that was powerful enough to completely change their behavior.
So, those tools are great for taking a snapshot of what's happening right now. But what about the past? To understand how we got here, sociologists basically have to become historical detectives. They use historical research, digging through archives, old documents, you name it, to trace how our society has evolved and changed over decades or even centuries.
Now all of this, observing, experimenting, digging through history, it kind of raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? Can we really call any of this science?
I mean, it's not like you're mixing chemicals in a lab. People are messy, they're unpredictable. We have thoughts and feelings and free will. So how on earth can you study us scientifically? Well, to answer that, we kind of have to rethink what science even means.
For a long, long time, the model for science was pretty simple. It was all about verification. You'd come up with a theory, and then your whole job was just to go out and find a bunch of evidence that proved you were right.
The classic example here is swans. So let's say your theory is all swans are white. Under the old model, you'd go out and you'd find a white swan. Great. Then you find another one. Awesome. You find 1,000,000 white swans. It seems like your theory is pretty much proven, right?
Well, then this philosopher, Karl Popper, came along and just flipped the whole idea on its head. He argued that it doesn't matter if you find 1,000,000 white swans, you can never be 100% certain you're right. But all it takes is finding one single black swan to prove that your entire theory is wrong.
And this is the game-changing idea of falsification. Popper said that real science isn't about trying to prove yourself right, it's about systematically and relentlessly trying to prove yourself wrong. A good scientific theory is one that can be tested, and the strongest theories, they're the ones that have survived every single attempt to knock them down.
So, this brings us all the way back. Sociology is a science, not because it has test tubes and lab coats, but because it follows this core principle. It uses systematic, evidence-based methods, all those tools we talked about, to rigorously test ideas about our social world, and, just as importantly, to throw out the ones that don't hold up.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Why does all this matter for us? Why is it so important to have a scientific way of understanding society in the first place?
Ultimately, what sociology gives us is a toolkit for skepticism and a toolkit for curiosity. It lets us challenge our own assumptions and start to see the invisible structures that shape our lives, everything from weird rituals in a park to the power dynamics in a university basement. It pushes us to ask not just what's happening, but why it's happening. So the question I'll leave you with is this: what hidden rules are shaping your world right now?